Well, in my view, this is the highlight of the entire weekend. I have to say, the person we're about to welcome is a man I believe is one of the greatest entrepreneurs that lives in Australia. And I say that for several reasons. A lot of people know him as Hungry Jack, and obviously his success in the burger world is well known, but when you hear, as you will in the course of our chat, just how many different industries he has thrived in and created serious wealth in, he's just a renaissance entrepreneur. And hell of a nice guy as well. Will you please welcome Jack Cowin? Thanks very much, man.
Good.
Have a seat over there. All righty. So how I thought we'd start is just to give the guys a bit of a story of how you even ended up in Australia, because you're Canadian by birth, right?
Well, thank you, Simon. I accepted Simon's invitation because I always wanted to be on stage at night, and I think this is probably the only chance I'll ever get. So here I am, folks. I made it. Yeah. To answer Simon's question, as he says, I grew up in Canada, and my father worked for the Ford Motor Company in Canada. And in 1960, I'm in high school, and they sent he and probably a dozen Canadians to Geelong in Victoria to build an engine plant for the Ford Motor Company. And he was here for 6 months. And at the end of 6 months, came back, and he said if I was young again, I'd move to Australia. And land of young country, land of the future, milk and honey. So I was, from high school on, I was predestined to want to come and visit Australia. And I finished university, got a job, went to work for a big financial company. And the only thing I learned out of that was I didn't want to work for a big company. It's like round square hole. That wasn't for me, and I wanted to. And from an early age, I was involved in entrepreneur. I was a paper boy. I cut lawns. I shoveled snow in Canada, and so I had an entrepreneurial leaning, I think. And so I'd worked for this big company, and I had a sales function. And I was doing quite well. And a couple guys I'd gone through high school with phoned me and said they had gone to work for the American Kentucky Fried Chicken Company. And they were sent to Australia to do market research on would Australians buy this product. And since I was the only guy in our high school class that knew where Australia was on the map, they phoned me to say, you should come down here because all the things that you really like in life, beer, bikinis, they went on and on. So I didn't take a lot since I'd been predestined all these years to want to visit Australia. Here is an excuse to go. So February 1968, got a plane, came to Australia for 3 weeks, spent a couple days at Bondi, and then I ended up doing the market research with these guys as to whether or not this business would work, what it had to do sales-wise. And so I paid, at the end of that 3 weeks, I paid a $1,000 deposit on a franchise area that if and when this business ever got started and worked, I had the rights to be able to develop 10 stores. I went back to Canada, got back to my job, and I got a phone call about 6 months later saying, if you don't do something about this, you're going to lose your $1,000. And that was a very large part of my worldly net worth. I'm like 24 years old at this stage. So I said, well, the one thing I want to do in my life is I'd like to be independent, control my own destiny, get into my own business, and this may be an opportunity. And I loved my 3 weeks in Australia. But the big problem was I didn't have any money. I had a 6-month-old child, I had a house, I had a mortgage, I had the whole catastrophe that most of us do. And so to get into business, you need some money. So I got on my bike and I went out and I started talking to people, and I got 30 Canadians to lend me $10,000 each. So I had $300,000. And the deal was I gave them 35% of the company. I had 65%, and I had to pay the money back between the 5th and the 10th year. And I tell the story of a 25-year-old kid comes into your office and says he wants to get into a business he's got no experience in. It's halfway around the world. There's no security. You're not going to get paid any interest on your money, and they'll give you 1.5% of the equity. How long before you throw them out of the office? Yeah. So the message was, thank God for people that are prepared to back people with ideas and the venture capital business. And so I was the recipient of that, the 300,000. People, we got into business here. We started off with one store, built the business. People got their money back between the 5th and 10th year, and that $10,000 loan that they got back today is worth almost $9 million. So it was a great trip for them, great trip for me. So,
Jack, can I just ask you, can I lend you 10 grand?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I'd be very pleased to.
So, even now, for a young business to go to 30 people and raise 10 grand, it's quite an impressive achievement. Back then, that is an astronomical amount of money. And I note in your history that you were, for a while, an insurance salesman. How important is sales when you're trying to be an entrepreneur?
Well, the reason I got into sales, as I say, it was the insurance business. And selling insurance is the toughest job in the world. Nothing any harder than trying to sell insurance because nobody really wants to buy it. So it's a tough sell. And I had done pretty well at it. I like sales, I like people, and so I had done pretty well. So the reason why I chose to kind of get into sales is the conventional wisdom in when you work for a big company is after 40 years they give you the famous gold watch and shake your hand and have a lunch for you and say thanks very much, hit the road, you're on your own. The sales aspect is there's a measuring stick. I don't care how old you are, what race, color, religion, whatever you are, there is a measuring stick that says if you're good, you've produced X amount of revenue, and that represents profit. So, as I say, in my early 20s, I was making a disproportionate amount of money to what I should. And the reason why I was able to raise that money from the 30 people was a lot of them knew that I'd been successful at what I did. Totally unrelated business, totally unrelated subject, but I had established a reputation with these people that if this guy's prepared to sell his house, move his wife and kid halfway around the world to get into a business he knows nothing about, he's been relatively successful at what he's done. Yeah. They may be able to do it again. So I guess the message is, whatever you're doing, none of us have a crystal ball to say, here's where we're going to end up. But whatever you do it well. And as I say, I think that then gives people the confidence to say, yes, we'll lend you the money or we'll invest with you. So I think that's the message. Do whatever you're doing. It may not be the end destination, but you develop a track record to say, here's where you're going to, this guy is able to do what he says he's going to do.
Yeah. And if we look at it now, you're, of course, the boot's on the other foot. You're fielding investment opportunities from 1 million people, from both small companies to tiny companies to huge ones. For the people in the room who are raising money, what do you look for? What do you think is important when people present to try and raise money?
What do you look for from people that are trying to raise money to sell you an idea?
So I think track record.
I think track record is important. I think that being able to differentiate yourself into a business that's got some chance of being able to do something different than what the competition are doing. Going back to when I started that early story I just told, people said, you're absolutely nuts thinking that, that people are going to go and buy, this funny red and white striped roof and all this and that. You haven't got a chance. And the banks wouldn't lend you any money because they said that, this idea is too. But if you're doing something in the early 70s, the restaurant business in Australia consisted of Chinese restaurants, fish and chip shops, and fancy white tablecloth. There was no kind of convenience food business. So this was something different. So you got big companies in different businesses. How do you come up with something that's a little bit different? Now, we talked about, Simon's written a book called Zigzag. When the big guys zig, you zag. How do you do something that's a little bit different to create a market that makes you stand out from what the general trend is going to do? And as I say, in the early 70s, KFC, Hungry Jack's, Domino's Pizza, these were businesses that didn't exist.
Yeah.
I remember when we got in the pizza business, people that we had never, this goes back into probably the early 80s. A lot of people they didn't know what pizza was.
Yeah,
They
really.
they never tasted. Now it's universal, it's ubiquitous.
It's interesting, isn't it? The price you pay to do something that's safe, that everybody says is all right, is very, very high indeed. Whereas, this is like going to the moon for Australians when opening these KFCs at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, extraordinary. Okay, so, there's two ways to look at a fast food franchise. Yes, they were bringing convenient food in, but they were also, as I see it, bringing something Australia had never seen, which is a business format that could be replicated, which was very, very novel. What's your feeling about the importance of systems like that in business?
Well, I think it's very important if you want. If you are a sole operator and you're going to be the chief cook and bottle washer of everything, then that's fine because you're there and you're controlling the waterfront. When I started in business, I had never run one of these restaurants. So the first thing I did is I went and hired somebody because the story was you talk about Eureka Moments. I went to a 1-week training program before I came to Australia to teach me how to run this business. 1 week. And I remember they were teaching you had to hold these chicken pieces and you sear the top of the drum. And anyway, one slipped out of my hand and this hot oil splashed on my hand. And I had that eureka moment that said, if I have to depend on my cooking skills to be successful, I'm doomed to failure. So I better hire somebody that can do this better than I can. And I did. I went out and hired somebody that was experienced. And I have never run. We've got probably in our business 1,000 different restaurants with everything we're involved in. I've never run one of them for one day.
Wow.
Because my job was not to run the restaurant. My job was to build a business.
Yeah.
And you can only do that if you got a system that you try and duplicate things and have the principles that run the same basic format, 100, or however how many outlets that you've got. So it's not depending on the individual skills of the chef.
Yeah.
It's depending on the system being implemented on a consistent basis. Now that's not easy. That's not easy when you've got, a lot of, young people that are inexperienced, casual, part-time workers that the industry kind of uses today. That's not easy to do, but it's the system that you're implementing rather than trying to back individual skills of somebody.
Yeah, and presumably the system's the only way of scaling
because
after a while you run out of talented people
Correct.
to lead it.
Yep, correct.
So, of course, you're the public face of Hungry Jack's. Maybe just tell the people, how did it end up as Hungry Jack's, not Burger King?
With the chicken business, right place, right time, mass production of chicken, price of chicken fell dramatically when in the late 60s. Chicken was Sunday dinner, special. Mass production chicken came in and price fell. So all of a sudden you had a quality product that people were able to buy, specialized. And so here we were, and I was living in Western Australia, in Perth, where I started the business. And so you say, well, what else can I do? Okay, that business is done. What else can I do? So the hamburger business in North America is like 50% of the industry. It's the giant sort of thing. So we'll get into the hamburger business. So I was living, first year I was in Australia, I lived in Sydney and started this business in Perth, because when you're away and you look at the map, it's not that far on the map, if you look at it. But when you're here and you got to fly to Adelaide and then on to Perth, like a 5 or 6 hour flight at that stage of the game. So I started a little test shop in Sydney in the hamburger business. We got the business going in Perth. And one of the beauties of youth is you don't know your own limitations, and I'm a prime candidate for that. Did not know, and as I say, geography was irrelevant. You know, you're here, you know, you're halfway around the world from where you came from. So started a small shop, and we're going to get into the hamburger business, and this big American company came along, and they owned a company called Burger King. And so we're going to do a joint venture, and I started buying some property in Sydney where we're going to get started. Anyway, make a long story short, they didn't proceed with the joint venture. I'd bought property in Sydney, so that joint venture wasn't going to work, so I had to retreat to Perth. I came to the realization. And somebody else had, we're going to start the business called Burger King, and somebody else owned the name. So this company did own a trademark called Hungry Jack, and they were selling pancakes and mashed potatoes in the U.S. under the name Hungry Jack. And so that was registered, so that's how it came about. If it would have been Hungry Simon's, probably wouldn't have chose it. In fact, it was Hungry Jack that seemed to fit. So that's how it evolved.
That's amazing, because
the first three, those properties we bought in Sydney, we ended up selling to McDonald's because they were coming in the market at the same time. So the first three McDonald's stores in Australia, we sold to them because they were looking to get established. And that happened because the joint venture that we wanted to do with this big company didn't get realized.
See, all this time I thought that you named it Hungry Jack because you were Jack.
Yeah, I know you did, so
Yeah.
but that's not the case. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so started off in chicken, then moved to burgers, but that's really just the beginning, isn't it? Because you had that great experience with Silvio's stroke Domino's.
Yep. Well, again, by the time we get, so that's through the 70s, 1986. In the fast food business today, drive-through windows, you know, people stick their arm out the window, grab the food, and keep on going. Convenient. What's more convenient than that is boom, boom, boom on the telephone. Yes, somebody brings it and delivers it to your door. You don't even have to get the car. So I was fascinated. While today 65% of the volume of fast food goes through the drive-through window. So that's convenience. So if home delivery is even more convenient, how do you get in? So I was interested in the pizza home delivery business, which was getting established. So we bought 50% of a home delivery business in Brisbane called Silvio's, 4 stores, paid $400,000, and got established in 1992. We bought the Domino's business in Sydney, which had gone broke 3 times. You know, it was early. Anyway, long story short, that company went public today. Well, it went public in 2005 at $2.20 a share. Today it's worth $13.50 a share, and the $400,000 initial investment that I made today is worth $300 million. So it's been a fantastic growth story of you know, the whole home delivery aspect, the whole convenience thing, and the people that run the business, the Domino's business today. They've expanded our franchise area. It went from Australia to New Zealand to France to Holland to Belgium, and it's still growing. You know, so it's great management, did a great job.
Yeah, I found that really interesting when they started moving overseas. Was that just predicated on the fact that the growth potential of Domino's in Australia was going to be capped, or was it just an easy buy to purchase there?
I think the former is probably what it is. There's a limitation. If you're a public company, then the people want to know, you know, what the growth prospects are, and you know, they're like 600 stores, 23 million people in Australia. You know, you go into Europe, you know, 300, 400 million people. So they're just bigger markets and more expansion. It hadn't done well initially, and so we're able to buy the territories at a good price. Yeah. And as I say, that continues. That's an area.
So I think an important lesson at first here is mastering a field, and then looking at different derivatives of that field can give you a lot of expansion. So you started out, as I see it, in that way. And then you went into media with, what remains one of the greatest moves ever in any form of Australian media. Do you want to take the guys through that?
Yeah, well, one of the important things in life that you learn is focus. How do you really concentrate your energy in the formative stages? You're going to hang out your own shingle. You're going to get into business. Focus your energy and your effort, because you cannot be all things to all people all the time. And you're generally going to have a limitation on the amount of money that you've got and the number of hours in the day. So if you spread your bet too far, if you diversify too early, you probably aren't focusing to the extent that you should. I said, I opened the first store when we moved to Australia in 1969. Every dollar that I was able to beg, borrow, or steal, and got our suppliers to kind of finance us with term payments so that we could put more money back into the business. Every dollar we made went back into this food service business. We got into food manufacturing, and so, but it's all basically focused on this one sort of business that, different things we got into complemented each other, was very focused. And my energy was very focused. How do we build a business from scratch to wherever we were? So by the time by 1992, I made my first investment outside that focused boundary of competitive foods, our business is called. And I put $4.5 million into a business which was Channel 10, and in the early 90s, late 80s, all the three commercial television had all gone broke. Alan Bond, Christopher Skase, Frank Lowy owned Channel 10, the great Frank Lowy of Westfield, went broke with Channel 10. And they're all in research. So a Canadian guy that I didn't know, but friend of a friend, called me, and he was in the television business in Canada. And he said, there's a great opportunity here because the TV industry here is uncompetitive. The cost structure is way too high. And he said, in Canada, we got American kind of TV spreads over. We got to compete against, so we got to keep our costs low. And he said, we can buy this business. So Westpac were the owners of the business at REITs receivership. So they bought it for $240 million, 90 down. Bank took back a note for 150. And I put $4.5 million, my first money outside the business, into this Channel 10 receivership. First year, $20 million in expenses out of the business. And it grew from there to a $3 billion market cap. Today, it's worth like $800,000 because the TV industry has kind of been through which is a whole other story. But I sold my interest in Channel 10. That 4.5 became a 70 million with the affiliate. I made a profit of $100 million. I'm like kind of bragging, but it was, again, right place, right time, and people that knew what they were doing. I knew nothing about it. This guy, Izzy Asper, that owned Can West, which were the principals, they came in, they could only own 15% of the votes under the media laws. And so he needed friendly people that would kind of be supportive of what he wanted to do. And so they knew they had a formula that said, here's how you run a low-cost business, and it was highly profitable. And as I say, they went public like 97, 98, something like that. And so I was able to sell my shares into that float, and as I say, it was a very profitable experience.
Yeah, amazing. And if we look at Channel 10 now, you could argue, barring a really big caveat, which is the internet, you could argue that a similar situation exists now, couldn't you?
Well, the game's changed. I mean, at that stage of the game was because they were just spending too much money. Here, if you were interviewing me on the television, you had a sound man, you had somebody asking the questions, you had a cameraman. When in Canada, since they didn't have that luxury, you'd have one guy with a camera with a microphone asking the questions. So they were able to cascade the cost side down. Today, you've got pay television. You've got, you went from 3 channels, there are now 9 with the digital, you know, so, and you've got the burgeoning internet of, you say, you know, so you've got it is a very different business today than what it was then, which was much simpler and much more, again, focused and concentrated in a narrow. And so if you got the formula right, the other thing they did is say, rather than trying to compete on all people, we'll go 16 to 39. And they focused, that's where the energy is, and that's where and so as a result, they built a profitable business.
So you're still on the board of 10?
I am. I sold my shares, and I'm still a small shareholder, but
Right.
But I've remained a director.
And you're still on the board of Fairfax?
I'm a new director of Fairfax the last
Right.
12 months, yeah.
Yeah. So with this really quite substantial position, not from a stock point of view, but rather from a impact point of view, what's your view of how these traditional media can survive in the age of
well, it is a very fascinating puzzle. I mean, the newspaper industry per se is a fascinating exercise of most people under the age of 40 today read it on the net, you know, on the iPad and things like this, and so a lot of the readership hasn't gone down, but the physical newspaper circulation is under pressure, and as a result of that, the advertising is moving, you know, and so the real question is, people reading it on the net, how do you monetize? How do you how do you get the advertising on people that read it isn't as strong as when you got a big full-page ad in front of you. So how do you monetize that? So where this all goes is a fascinating puzzle that we're in the midst of trying to figure out. And this isn't just a Fairfax. It's not just a Rupert Murdoch, news. The whole industry worldwide in the newspaper industry is going through this revolution of change, and where the end result is, and how you position, and how you make money out of people. I mean, the trend now is the mobile, not just the how do you get advertising? You're going to read on your smartphone the newspaper. How do you advertise on that? And it is with difficulty. So I don't profess to say that I can sit here and tell you what the future is, because it's under heavy review by a lot of different people to try and figure out how do you make this model profitable.
Do you feel these days that it's too risky to enter these technology dominated fields where the sands is shifting? Do you always go back to more traditional investments?
Well, traditionally I have, because one of the things that I kind of carry is if you're going to make an investment, you have to be able to understand it. And to be frank with you, some of the technological stuff, I don't understand. Sure. I'm a bit of a dinosaur in some of these things, and I think that's one of the investment principles. Make sure you understand what you're doing, and if you can't explain it to your kids as to how this business is going to work and how it's going to, and you have to depend on some guru somewhere to try and show you how it's going to work, be careful, because as I say, the ability to understand what you're doing, where the risk is, where the opportunities are. If you don't understand that, you're very easy to get in trouble.
Great advice. Okay, so let's have a look at just a few more of the many deals that you've done. Presumably because it was a way of creating more margin in your food business, you then moved into cattle on a large scale. Can you take us through that? Yeah,
we as I say, when we're getting in the hamburger business, and one of the problems when you make hamburgers in the 70s was people say you're going to take steak and grind it up and make it into a hamburger. You have to put sawdust or something in there to make it go further. So we couldn't get the product consistency that we wanted from suppliers. So we get in and we buy a machine. It makes these patties and you sell them. And then you buy a bigger machine, and then you got excess capacity, so you start selling to the supermarkets and things like that. So next thing you know, we're in a fully blown supply business. And so one of the things we said, well, where's the opportunity here? How do we take this, and do we sell this business to one of the AACO was a company around that was looking at expand. They were getting into food manufacturing, and do we sell it to them? Anyway, to make a long story short, AMP, the insurance company, owned a business called Stanbroke, which was the largest cattle company in the world. It had 29 million acres of land, bigger than England, 600,000 cows, and they said, we're going to sell it. So we started off, can we sell our business into something else that may want to? And so all of a sudden, here's one of these other companies that are up for sale. So I and two other parties got together and we put a tender in, somewhat cheeky, and we weren't the highest tender, but we got the deal because we had a clean, non-conditional deal. And we bought this 29 million acres of land for $495 million. And we're in the cattle business. And I have to tell you, it was a great enlightening experience. I never used to watch how much rainfall there is in, Central America, Central Australia, and things like this. But you're measuring rainfall, and it is a very the farming business where you're depending on Mother Nature is a very complicated business. So anyway, we're in this business. We now own it. Somewhat good luck, and the fact that we were able to get this deal done. And I had two other partners, as I say, and one of the partners said, we bought this at the right price. If we break it up and sell it off in pieces, we'll make more money than run it. And myself and the second partner, we got it because thought we were in the business. So management are there, and they say, well, we can, this guy wants to do it this way, and you two want to do it this way. I can't keep everybody happy. So we have to have a plan that says, here's where we go. So they say, okay, well, you buy us or we'll buy you. So this particular party, who was from Victoria, he knew the value of all these different 29 million acres. He knew what they were able to sell for. So he bought us. He made an offer to us $200 million more than what we had paid, and we said, we'll take it. Thank you, and because that's more money than what we want to pay you, proportionally. And so I was in and out of the deal in 6 months, and the Australian Financial Review said I was Australia's shortest-lived cattle baron. But it was an experience. As I say, we ended up doing that not because we had a great vision, but that's when the opportunity presented itself. Here's this business, we'll put in a bid, and we ended up with it.
So what was your net return in 6 months?
Well, I guess we made, our company made $50 million. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So when you look at food now, a lot of smart people are saying that there's going to be a renaissance in food and water and in these kind of basic commodities. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, it is a complicated business. I mean, we all read about Australia being the food producer for these, 40% of the world's population live on our doorstep. China and India being the two biggest countries in Southeast Asia. And so the real question is, as population continues to grow, how do these people feed themselves? And in Australia is kind of, if we read things that say, we will be the food bowl for these Asian populations that continue to grow and expand. That's a great theory, but the big problem that I think exists is how do we run these agricultural businesses? Water and drought and things like this are something that so there is risk. This is not a fait accompli that we can achieve that. And as I say, my 6-month exposure, we've got other businesses that are in manufacturing in which, even worse than cattle are we're in the vegetable processing business, the bags of lettuce that you buy in shops called fresh cuts and things like that. And the perishable businesses, where you got a crop of lettuce growing, and boom, we get a hailstorm comes in, wipes it out, and the prices skyrocket, and the supermarkets say to you, But you've got a contract that's X, and you have to honor that. Meanwhile, the prices are up here because there's no supply.
Yeah.
It is a very complicated business, and the ability to do that in mass scale, wage levels. How do we get labor to go and want to work in rural Australia when it's being concentrated in the cities? This is not an easy problem. And again, it's I don't really know the answer, Simon, as to where this goes, but it's not simple.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, switching gears a little, and we could talk for the rest of the afternoon just about the different deals you've done. One I'd like to just address, though, because it was, I think, a really, really cool deal was Bridge Climb. Can you tell a story of how that happened and then what happened?
I'm a member of a business organization called YPO, which stands for Young Presidents. I'm no longer young, I'm old. But by the time, they throw you out when you're 50. But YPO is the international organization that, with its alumni, 20,000 CEOs around the world. And anyway, they had a conference in Sydney in the late 80s. And the Sydney Harbour Bridge, you weren't allowed to climb over unless it was 3 in the morning, you're drunk, and you're able to climb over some barrier, which probably some of you done in your youth. But we got permission for this. There were 400 largely Americans that came to visit Australia, and we got permission to be able to walk them over the top of the bridge, and which was a unique experience. Anyway, at the end of it, they had to fill out a evaluation form, which said, how do you rate this? They said 12 out of 10. This is the best thing that we did in all the time we were in Australia. Very exciting, the view, the this, the that, 12 out of 10. So the guy that ran that particular event was a guy called Paul Cave, and he read all these research reports from tourists that said, what a fantastic experience this was. He said, well, there must be a business here. So he made an application to the New South Wales RTA, and they gave him a letter back with 70 reasons why this is a bad idea. People are going to drop their cameras, they're going to drop their sunglasses, there'll be accidents on the bridge, people fall off to do this. So 8 years later, and meanwhile, he continues with this. I said no to him 3 times, came to see me as an investor. I said no because the feedback I thought after years was that this is a wish too hard. And sometimes, there are things that you have to say, enough's enough. I'm not, you're being too kind of bullheaded by continuing to persist, and that's where I thought he was. Anyway, I got a phone call one day, this is 8 years later after this event, which said, he's got approval. A friend of mine phoned and said he's got approval. So anyway, to make a long story short, he wanted $12 million to, the uniforms of this, of that. And we said, no, we'll give you 6 because we can all be wise in hindsight, but we weren't sure that this was going to work on a long-term basis. What if somebody did fall off, or what if somebody got hurt and they closed you down? So we spent $6 million gearing it up and fitting it out. And it opened in 1998, and today it's probably rated as, if not one of the best tourist attractions in Australia. But it all came from international visitors, from that one event. And today, it's a highly successful business. Probably a number of you probably done it, and if you had to build the bridge and try and make money off that, it'd be tough. The fact that you're able to kind of plug into an idea, and so it was kind of good luck and good management and persistence to be able to stay with that. So I'm the largest shareholder in that. From kind of as the years have gone by, I've increased my position.
Yeah, really staggering persistence when you think about it. I don't think there'd be many people who would fight the government for that many years to get that through.
Yeah.
Extraordinary.
Yeah.
So obviously you've had a lot of wins, but behind the scenes there's probably been some tough periods where you, in particular businesses or situations, for the guys that might be doing it tough a little out there, Can you take us through any of the
Yeah,
details?
I mean, my kind of view on, on the success hit ratio is the fact that unless you've had some failures along the way, you're probably not trying hard enough. And so, you have to take some risk in life. And unless, as I say, everybody's got a perfect record, they're either not telling the truth or they're not pushing the edge of the envelope enough where the better opportunities are, because without risk, there's no real significant reward. And I think back. I mentioned one already. We're going to open up. We're going to do a joint venture with this big American company, and they said no, we can't. So all of a sudden, I got to retreat to Perth, and I had this land, and so the deal fell through. And we had to kind of all of a sudden regroup and reposition. I moved to Perth, and away we go. By the time I get to 1980, I'm living in Perth, and we wanted to expand into Sydney. So I did a joint venture with Tooth & Company to open. We're going to convert pubs to hamburger shops. And we did the deal, and we spent about a week dealing with what happens if we get bought out by another company. We spent about a week drawing up this contract and things like this. We didn't spend 10 seconds thinking about what happens if Tooth gets bought out by somebody. A guy in the 80s, for you that are older, remember John Spalvin's had a company called AdSteam, and AdSteam controlled Woolworths and Tooth & Company and this and that. And he came in and he was a controller. He said, look, we're in the business of turning assets into cash, and you're using our assets. So anyway, so all of a sudden I'd moved from Perth to Sydney, and we're going to do this joint venture in Liverpool and George Street. There's the original Hungry Jack's store there was a pub. We went in the basement and the ground floor, and it was a great formula. Unfortunately, they came along and bought us out, or we had to buy them out in order to progress the deal. We had a relationship with Burger King, who got bought by a big British liquor company, and they came in and they wanted to buy our business. We couldn't reach agreement on it, so they said, we're going to stop you from being able to grow. Spent 5 years in litigation. Had a successful win at the end, but litigation, if you can avoid it, do so, because you never know where it's going to come out. We were fortunate that we would win. But again, big companies, today we're in the final stages of, I talked about the success we had with Domino's. The company that owns the KFC business bought Pizza Hut and merged it with the KFC business. They said, oh, you're a competitor now because we've done this, but now you own the Domino's, which was well before they did this. And so we're not going to renew your franchise agreement. So we're in the midst of having to sell that business because they won't renew our franchise contracts. We tried to get the franchising laws changed to be able to protect franchisees from what we call unreasonable action on the part of, we're a franchisor in the hamburger business, but franchisees, there's a very unfair balance between protection of a franchisee and a franchisor who wants to be opportunistic. Yeah. So anyway, we spent a couple, 3-4 years, lots of money trying to get we had a couple studies on franchise law. We came within one vote in the West Australian Parliament of getting them to change about a year ago now, getting them to change to give franchisees more protection. If I look back on that litany of kind of things I just talked about, it's generally big companies dealing with entrepreneurs. And the lesson that I've learned is, if you think you're right, you got to stick with it. You can't be too dogged, and you got to know when to quit too if you're not. But generally, big companies work on the basis in dealing with entrepreneurs that the little guy will eventually fold, and they do. I mean, the cost of litigation, the cost of fighting these things is really tough. And so you have to have the courage of your convictions to hang in when you think you're right, because the big companies will use financial leverage to try and get their way. And when you're dealing. So as I say, I could give you 3 or 4 of those of,
Yeah.
of contractual things where we've ended up in trying to defend what we think is right.
Yeah. Now, quite unusually, you've articulated a series of business lessons that it'd be great if you could share just a handful of those from all your experience, because a lot of great entrepreneurs, they do what they do intuitively, and you ask them how they did it, they can't necessarily tell you. But what's really cool about Jack, and I think he shares it with another guy, Ray Dalio in the States, who owns the biggest hedge fund in the world, who has also carefully articulated his lessons. But this is very, very rare that someone actually does the thinking as to how they did it for the benefit of others. And if you could take us through.
I don't know, maybe 7 or 8, 10 years ago, I gave a speech to a group in which I called it life's lessons of, what if I knew then what I know now, what would I do different? And I put that together, and I've written these out, and if I've given a copy of this to Simon, and if any of you want to get a copy of this rather than me kind of walking you through it, I'd be pleased to have Simon share it with you.
And me too. It's $6,997. No.
Yeah. Free, folks. Yeah. Simon has a great business. He gets people like me to come for free, and he charges you. So, but this is free. Just to give a couple of the highlights, rule 1 is the most important thing in life is your health. If you lose your health, nothing else counts. What would have Carrie Packer paid to be able to have a new kidney, that worked? So, health. Second, integrity. If you can't look in the mirror and say, when you get up in the morning and say, I've done an honest deal, how much would the Rodney Adlers, the Alan Bonds, and things like this, if they were able to turn back the clock and say, I was able to do this different, how would they feel about it today? So those are kind of number 1 and 2. The third is, I've touched on, I think, a bit today, control your own destiny. I think that in my case, my father had worked for a big company. And all the politics and all the nonsense that goes along with who's going to get the next job, who's going to get fired, all that. The only thing I wanted to do when I was young was I wanted to get into my own business so I could control my own destiny. Did not want to work for a big company. So the most well-balanced people that I know basically it doesn't mean you have to be in your own business, but you have to be in a position whereby if you're not happy with the circumstances, you can leave, you can do whatever you want to do. Control your own destiny, because it's really important. You don't have to stay in a job that you hate because you got your mortgage and your school fees and all those other things. You have to get yourself into a position whereby you can do that. The next point, you have to take some risk. I think we touched on that a bit. If you don't take risk, you probably can't get a meaningful kind of result. So people don't hand out, rewards willingly. You have to earn them, and risk is generally part of that. And then I've listed a whole bunch of caveats to that. Risk is something that, you don't have to bet the farm. One of my kind of business heroes is Rupert Murdoch. He's probably had the greatest success of any Australian businessman I know, but he's bet the farm 3 times. He's rolled the dice to be able to do that. Depends on, I guess, what your nature is. I'm not of that school. I'm saying you don't have to bet the farm. You use cricket parlance. You hit a single or a double, you'll get there. You don't have to swing for a 6 every time. So compound interest is a wonderful thing. I've been in business for 44 years. So, with time, you don't have to, as I say, bet the farm. No shortage of good deals. You don't fall in love with a deal. If you can't get it the way you like it, you don't have to kind of sink with the ship. But to get there, these are caveats to risk. The number 1 priority of a chief executive is stay in business. Stay in business. That's the number 1 priority. And as a result of that, you got to figure out, what if something goes wrong? Is this going to be terminal? Will it put you out of business? What can go wrong? What's the margin of error? I like to think through what's the worst case scenario. You know, if the roof caves in here right now, you know, what is the worst case scenario that can happen? And if you know what that is, and you work back from that, you generally know you can kind of end up. And then the last kind of scenario is, you know, you don't wait till the dogs are barking, you know, to take some action on something. Banks don't lend money when it's, you know, they don't hand out umbrellas when it's raining, you know, so you have to be in a position whereby you have to anticipate what their needs are and go early rather than waiting till somebody's knocking on your door looking for. So when they pass the bickies around, take some, because when you want it and when you're hungry, they might not be passing them around. Get some money off the table. You sleep better at night. You know, you don't, you know, try and have some independence. Keep some powder dry, you know, so that when the opportunity. I was lucky when I talked about that $1,000 that I invested when I started business. If I didn't have that $1,000, I'd be shoveling snow in Canada today, you know. So, I mean, you have to have that opportunity fund. And I guess the other important thing is be prepared to model something. I'm in the philosophy, you know, somebody got a grandiose idea, I'm going to do all these things. Get somebody who will part with their money to buy the product that you want to sell in a modeling. You know, you build this massive aircraft, you know, it's got all these bells and whistles and things like this, and then you find it's too heavy, it won't get off the runway. You know, model something in a miniature form so that you can demonstrate that the idea works rather than trying to do it the end grand poo-ha of all deals. You know, model it to show that it works. Family is important. My daughter's sitting down here. She's here. If I tell something that's not true, she stands up and says bullshit, but she's sitting down here. Family is important. I said, you know, you have to have a tolerant wife. You have to be good to your children because they check you into the nursing home eventually. You know, so. And, you know, probably more important is you have to enjoy yourself. You know, if you say, like, you know, the great majority of people that are probably in this room, you're probably looking at what's next in line, and none of us know really what the way the cards are going to get dealt. But you have to gravitate to the things you enjoy. If you don't enjoy doing it, you're probably on the wrong tram. You know, you have to. I have a philosophy that says when you can't tell the difference between work and play, you're in the right place because you're enjoying what you're doing. Just finish this off. Never give up. You know, if you think you're right, you got to be persistent. And to me, that's one of the keys of successful people is the ability to be able to, when things are tough, pick yourself up, get back in the game, because I guarantee you nothing will ever go 100% of the way you think it will. And you have to be persistent. You don't die on your sword. You know, the famous Kenny Rogers song, you got to know when to hold them, you got to know when to fold them. You know, that's true. Don't get caught up in your own self-importance. Be humble even if you don't believe it. You know, so. So, as I say, I talked about focus earlier. You know, my kind of philosophy was get a mainstream business, be a rifle, you know, have something that produces cash. And then as I say, I was very much of a rifle from 1969 to 1992, and then I put that $4.5 million, which I borrowed into this TV business, and 5 years later, I had money that I've then continued to kind of reinvest into other things. Meanwhile, we still got, you know, Competitive Foods, our mainstream business, a $1.4 billion business. So we still got that produces cash, but we also got some money outside the business, and it's enabled me to kind of learn and do other things. So, and I guess the last point here is understand the business. We've talked about that, you know, the technology stuff. I had, Simon, maybe, I learn from successful entrepreneurs. I have a philosophy on the word entrepreneur, which I share with the group. I learned this, and if you wonder what entrepreneur is, when I was told this, and I've never forgotten it because it's really important, is an entrepreneur is a cross between an astronomer and a microbiologist. Now that sounds a little weird, doesn't it? A cross between an astronomer and a microbiologist. And what that means is an astronomer is looking at the stars. He's got the big picture. He's out there looking at the vision. The microbiologist is looking through the microscope, and he's looking at the detail. If you're an astronomer only, or if you're a microbiologist only, you're probably not going to make it. Because if you're the microbiologist, you can't see the wood for the trees. You're so immersed in the pine needles of what's going on is that the detail kills you. You don't get there. If you're an astronomer only, and you're just looking at the big picture, the detail will run away and you won't. So an entrepreneur is a cross between those two things, in that you have to be able to have the vision, you have to be able to look at the stars and see what the future is, and at the same time, you got to be attentive enough to the detail that they don't steal it from you. And because you're so busy looking at the big picture, meanwhile you go broke because somebody that wasn't managing the accounts payable or something like that. So that's my definition of an entrepreneur. The ability to be able to do both of those things at the same time. You got a lot of people that are one or the other. You know, an accountant, per se, sometimes isn't successful because he's so into the minutiae of the deal. And he needs that vision. And as I say, to be an entrepreneur, you got to do both of those things. What's the big picture? And yet, I got to still make sure that we're making money and that we're making profit, things like that.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. I was told that, and I never forgot that. And as I say, I think about that frequently as to, you know, we get off on tangents, and when we sometimes, you get into the detail. And so keep that in mind when you're thinking about where you want to go with your own career and business activities.
One last question before we go.
Yep.
What's next in the future? Is there any particular area you're heading in?
Yes, I want to stay alive. When you get old, you know, that becomes a bigger issue. I was once the young guy. You too will grow old someday. Believe me. It, as I say, I think the challenge in life is how do you enjoy yourself. And as I said that a minute ago, is if you enjoy what you do, you'll probably be successful at it. If you're swimming against the current and you're there for that paycheck, but you really don't like it, be brave enough to have the courage to head for the exit and get in. Find something that you like. And and that may not be the end destination. None of us ever know what the end destination is. But if you're doing something that you enjoy, you're probably going to be good at it. And if you're good at it, then that's where you get rewarded. So I wish you luck in your endeavors, and thank you.
Well, that was an incredible hour, wasn't it? We did. Just a lifetime of wisdom, and it's, on behalf of everybody, I just want to say how appreciative we are that you've taken the time to share those lessons.
Yeah, well, thank you, Simon. I'm somewhat, people say, why don't you go public? I like the idea of being private because it probably fits my controlling your own destiny, so you don't have some stockbroker, somebody else is going to sell it. So I hope those kind of comments are, you need good luck. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than smart, as they say, and you need support of other people. Probably didn't touch on that, but one of the realizations is you can't do it on your own unless you got some very unique and specialized talent. Generally, if we're talking about business, it's a team. You got to think as a team, and I've been fortunate to have people that have worked with me almost the entire time I've been in Australia. And if I had to do it on my own, probably still be operating that single store in Western Australia. You know?
Yeah.
So, as I say, that moment of the Eureka moment of burning my hand, you know, taught me that I can't do this on my own.
Yeah.
So, build a team of people. Complementary skills are really important. Hire smart people. Find out what you do well. Find out what you don't do too well. Hire the people that are going to fill those holes in your repertoire. And as I say, a complementary management team can do things, because it's very difficult for any one of us to try and do something on our own. So, thank you, Senator.
Brilliant.
Great.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jack Cowin.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Tony.
Good,
Really
good, good.
appreciate it.